Howdy guys, Bookie Laura here. Now recently you might have seen my 2017 reading review courtesy of Goodreads, and you may have realised that I'm an absolute data nerd. I love tracking my reading and all that entails. And so it just got me thinking about the goals which I'd set for myself this year and how I've done with those. So this is my kind of 2017 goals summary. So I went back and watched the video that I set for myself at the start of this year, and on it there were 3 goals, and I'm going to tell you about them each individually and how I feel that I've succeeded or not with them. So the first one, which I rather annoyingly harped on a lot about in the goals video, was that I wanted to be focused more on reading for pleasure, because I felt that in 2016 I had, as I'd entered BookTube, I'd become more involved with reading books which I felt I should read. So I'd read a lot more classics and books which, you know, just like a good reader would read them, and actually I wanted 2017 to be more about reading the books which I was into, books that I wanted to read, rather than books I felt I should read. I wasn't 100% sure how to kind of track this. I mean, I had set the sort of trackable goal, I suppose, of reading at least 1 book a month, which I was excited about. I'd completely forgotten that I'd set this goal at all, so I felt that that was probably unachievable. What I did was went onto Goodreads, looked through the books that I'd read in 2017 to see how many of them were books which I was excited about reading before I read them, and actually there were absolutely shed loads of them, which came as a real surprise to me. There was certainly more than 12, so I think in the grand scheme of things, I think that that counts as reading at least a book a month, which I was excited about, although I don't think it averaged out as 1 every month. Over the course of the year it did. This is something that I want to look at more next year. I think this year I got more into reading arcs, and I also took part in ShakeTube, which was choosing books sort of slightly outside of my own choosing, or reading books, sorry, slightly outside of my own decision making, but obviously I choose the arcs that I read, and I wanted to take part in ShakeTube, so there is an element still of wanting to be involved, but I think maybe 2018 can be the book where I just get selfish, I don't know. Another way which I suppose I could have used to track my reading was that my average score that I gave for books last year was a 3.4, this year was 3.7, which implies that actually I was gaining more pleasure in my reading. I was reading books which I was giving a higher rating to, therefore I must have been enjoying them more. That makes sense, right? Another goal which I set for myself was that I wanted to read more non-fiction. I had in my head there were quite a few non-fiction books that had sort of piqued my interest, and I was quite keen to get around to reading those because it was something that I didn't think I typically read. In my head, this had gone quite negatively. I think that I had 1 or 2 books which I'd read that were non-fiction which I hadn't particularly enjoyed, particularly early in the year, and that had kind of, I don't know what the word is, that had confused my thinking, I suppose, because actually when I went back and looked at the number of non-fiction that I had read a grand total of 11 non-fiction books this year, which is almost 1 a month, which was the unofficial goal that I'd set for myself at the start of the year, which really surprised me because in my head I'd only read 2 or 3 and hated them all. But I think it's more to do with books that I consider to be non-fiction are the ones that I found more intense, the ones that I didn't enjoy. Moondust and The Lost City of Zed, where I felt that I got bogged down in the political and economical details rather than the non-fiction itself. One of the non-fiction books which I read actually went down in my top 5 books of the year, so it can't have all been that bad. So that goal was another success. And then the final goal which I'd set for myself was that I wanted to read more children's fiction that was aimed at older children, the age group that I teach. Now, I have learned that what I actually meant was middle grade fiction, so that alone is a success because I now know what that means. So that's cool. I had a look through, again, the books that I'd read this year, and I read 14 books which I would consider to be middle grade fiction, which actually surprised me. It was lower than I expected, but I think that's because at the end of the year I've read quite a lot of middle grade fiction, so in my head, it feels like I've read more. One thing that I did notice when I looked through at the middle grade books that I'd read was that actually the majority of them were books that I was reading because I needed to for work. They were books that I was going to teach from, that I wanted to read first. So perhaps one of the things I'm thinking for next year is to kind of look at reading middle grade fiction for pleasure and not just as part of my work. And actually that's, always a good thing to do, surely. So rather surprisingly, I set myself 3 goals this year, and actually every single one of them I had achieved on, and much more spectacularly than I expected. This makes me feel very positively about 2018. I will be setting myself some reading goals, and I do intend to still keep them quite low-key, because I think reading should be for pleasure, and actually if you don't want to read something, or you do want to read something, just do it. But I think it's made me feel quite cool about what the future holds, and perhaps I can set myself some new goals which will allow me to expand my reading but still read for pleasure. Let me know what your reading goals are, or were, for 2017 and how you got on, or any goals that you intend to set for next year. I'm kind of just setting in motion this sort of brain process of choosing my goals for next year, so it'll be cool to see what other people are thinking of. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.